Good day, everybody. Today we're looking at managing user security, chapter 3. And in this chapter, certification objectives that's under the CompTIA Security Plus. Certification objectives are compare and contrast types of attack, given a scenario, troubleshoot common security issues, given a scenario, implement secure protocols, explain the importance of physical security controls, compare and contrast identity and access management concepts, given a scenario, install and configure identity and access services, given a scenario, implement identity and access management controls, and given a scenario, differentiate common account management practices. Under the Microsoft MTA Security Fundamentals, the certification objectives are to understand user authentication, to understand permissions, to understand password policies, and to understand client protection. Section 3.1, authentication and control. Key terms are Active Directory, attack surface, authentication, behavioral biometrics, crossover error rate, discretionary access control, dongle, false acceptance rate, false rejection rate, federated identity management, hardening, job rotation, Kerberos, key distribution center, LDAPs, lightweight directory access protocol, mandatory access control, mandatory vacations, multi-factor authentication, one-time password, permission, policy, right, role-based access control, rule-based access control, secondary login, security account manager, security assertion markup language, Shibboleth, single sign-on, transitive trust, and user account control. These are the key terms that we will be coming across in section 3.1, authentication and control. Our learning goals are to explain the purpose of authentication, to discuss the use of access levels, to describe non-technical approaches to user security, and to compare authentication on a local computer to authentication on a network computer. Authentication. What is an authentication? Or user authentication. What is an authentication? An authentication is the process of validating a user. Before authentication, you will always have an identity. Similarly, is when you go to somewhere and you're being asked to come with a government issue ID. Your government issue ID is your identity, which has your first name, your last name, your DOB, and some other information. Especially a good example of your government issue ID is your driver's license. It also has your address. Authentication is the process of validating an identity, which is why it is important, because identity is weak. Anybody can claim to be anybody. For example, anybody can claim to be me, and I can claim to be someone else. So how do you validate that identity? This is where authentication comes in. which is a process of validating a user. Another good example is when you're being pulled over by the police. They're going to ask you for your identity, which is your ID, which is your driver's license. When you pull out your driver's license, they will run it through their, computer. Again, what are they trying to do? They're trying to validate if you are truly who you claim to be, which is the information contained in that identity. So again, identity is weak. So how do you validate an identity? It is only through the process of authentication. There are different types of authentication, some of which we'll be looking at in this course. The first one, which is the most common form of authentication, is passwords. Password is the most common authentication method. Also, one of the least secure method. Password is the one of the least secure method of authentication. If you have a weak password, or if your password has been shoulder soft, meaning somebody has actually seen your password, if you have reused those passwords on multiple sites, if you are using poor password policies, meaning that if your password is a word that is found in the dictionary, because again, there are so many password cracking tools. So again, password is one of the least secure methods when it comes to authentication. Multi-factor authentication, this is when different forms of authentication are combined. And these different forms of authentications are what you know, what you are, and what you have. And we'll be looking at each of these different forms of authentication, starting with what you know. A good example of what you know is the password, or when you are being asked a security question. Another method under the multi-factor authentication, another different form, is what you have. User must possess a device that contains security information. An example of what you have is token or tokens, or what is called common access cards. This is not used to replace a password. That is why that method is called multi-factor. Multi-factor means you're combining two or more forms. Now there are three forms: what you know, what you have, and what you are. Or what you are. Those are the three forms. Now, a combination of two or more is what represents multi-factor. That's why it's called multi-factor authentications. Example of what you have is tokens common access card. This is not used to replace passwords. Also, as part of the example of what you have is a one-time password or a dongle. What is a one-time password? This is a password that is valid for only one login or transaction. And it is often valid for only a short period of time, meaning if you don't use the one-time password within the specified time, it automatically expires. A dongle is a physical token inserted into a computer's USB port. The third form is what you are. What you are is refers to your biological features that is the biological features of the user. And this is biometrics. Again, biometrics, what is biometrics? This is the measurement and the analysis of your biological features. Example of biometrics is the finger, the retina, the iris scan, the facial recognition, the voice, or the palm. These are just part of the biometric is also keystroke. These are just some of the examples of what you are. What you do is the fourth form under the multi-factor authentication. Behavioral biometrics. What is behavioral biometrics? This is an authentication method identifying measurable patterns in human activities. Keystroke dynamics is an example of behavioral biometrics. And keystroke dynamics measures the patterns of rhythm and timing that is generated when a person is using the keyboard on a system. Also, what you do or where you are in some situation, example of that is the Wi-Fi triangulation, GPS, your IP address. All these forms are different forms of authentication under the multi-factor authentication. Security error rates concerning biometrics authentication. Even though biometric is considered to be secured, it still has some potential risk when it comes to authentication. That's the biometrics. There's what is called false acceptance rate. False acceptance rate is when the biometrics credential biometric credential are authorized on invalid characteristics, meaning that the biometric system allows someone that is unauthorized based on his or her authorized credentials. That's false acceptance. This is determined by the ratio of the number of false acceptance divided by the number of identification attempts. Next is false rejection rate. This is when someone who is authorized is being denied by the biometrics system. That is denying an authorized biometric credential. This is determined by the number of false rejection divided by the number of identification attempts. Crossover error rate, this is the portion where the false acceptance rate and the false rejection rate are equal. And this next image describe as well as explain what I just mentioned. Now, this is the crossover error rate. This is where the crossover error rate, this is where the FAR, which is the false acceptance rate, and the false rejection rate, this is where it meets. At this point, this is where that system is being calibrated. And at this point, it means it is balanced. Because you want to reduce the number of false acceptance rate. And you also want to try to, again, according to this diagram, you want to try to increase the false rejection rate, which is the value versus the sensitivity. Access levels, there are four types of access level, starting with mandatory access control. This is a security strategy that sets a strict level of access to resources based on the criteria set by the network administrator or by the organization. Mandatory access control is often used with the military or supporting organization. Discretionary access control is another type of access level. This is when user can be granted additional rights to data or to information or to resources beyond what he or she is allowed by assigned access level. Discretionary access control, it is based on the owner of the asset. The owner of the asset determines the type of asset, whether full a privilege or full rights. That's why it's called discretionary. And here is an image showing the mandatory access control. If your sensitivity label does not align with your classification of the information you're trying to access, you won't be able to access that. That's why it's called mandatory. For example, someone that has a top secret clearance will only have access to top secret resources. He or she may not, depending on the organization, he or she may not have access to secret resources or even confidential. Likewise, someone with a clearance of secret and the sensitivity level of the resource he or she is trying to access is secret, he or she will not have access to top secret resources nor confidential resources. Role-based access control is another example under the access levels. Role-based access control is rights. It's a type of access control where rights are assigned to role instead of manually to each individual user, meaning the role you perform within the organization is what determines the access you will have. The fourth one is the rule-based access control. This is where the rules are established for various situations, such as allowing users to log in to the network only during specific time or times. Security options related to existing employee. Businesses can underestimate the threats from an existing employee. One of the major threats from an existing employee is insider threat. And that is why organization has actually put in place these security options for existing employee. Mandatory vacation. This is when users are forced to take vacations where they are not on premises or using their system. Access to system and premises are removed. These allows for a system check by the business. The other one, another one under the security option related to existing employee is job rotation. User can cycle through different roles. New user can verify settings, data, and other aspects of the position. And that's why if you go to the bank, if you go physically to the bank, this is one of the things the bank has actually made as part of their own rule, which is the same individual you see at the counter today, it's not the same individual you will meet at that same counter when you go there the following day, the next day, because they practice job rotation. User access to resources. You have least privilege. This is where employees have only the privileges needed to perform their day-to-day job responsibilities. Local computer access. You have rights and permission. What is a right? A right is the ability to perform a type of action on the computer. Permission. A permission deals with specific abilities within a right or with files and folders. That means you can have permission and you may not have the right. But if you have the right, you also can indirectly have permission. So right is much more higher than permission. Workstation on a network, we have Active Directory. This is a database of network resources, and it includes objects such as user and group accounts, computers, servers, and printers. Directories are built on LDAP standard. What is LDAP? LDAP is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And these provide standards and ensures that that directories or directory services are constructed and used in the same manner. LDAPs, this is the secure form of LDAP. That's the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, where LDAP is used with SSL to send directory communications encrypted. Tree approach, this are directories. This is where directories are constructed in hierarchical manner. Organizational unit, OU, objects that further organize a database. Leaf objects are objects that represent resources such as user or printers. And here is the diagram explaining what I just mentioned now. You could see the roots, that's the root domain, and you can see the OU, the organizational unit, which are the different departments in this context: IT staff, accountants, which is the accounting department, and support staff. The leave object, which represent the resources, and these are the different resources: the users, the servers, the printers, and the computers. Kerberos, this is a standard authentication protocol on all versions of Microsoft Server when using Active Directory. KDC, that's the Key Distribution Center. This is a service running on a server that has a copy of the Active Directory to manage the main functions of authentication service exchange, as well as ticket granting service exchange. Here is an image explaining the KDC, which is the Key Distribution Center. Now, the Key Distribution Center has two services. It has the authentication service, and it also has the ticket granting service. The authentication service first must authenticate the user before that user, after he or she has been authenticated, before that user can be granted access to the resource or resources he or she needs to use. And as you can see in this diagram, the first thing the user does is to send his username. In this context, this user sends his username and his pass. Now, the authentication service of the KDC kicks in. It verifies, and that's when it sends the response. I have verified your information from the Active Directory. Here are your tickets to grant tickets pass for the next few hours, meaning it could be, those few hours could be 1 hour, 2 hours, or it could even be 24 hours. Next, the user now needs to present those tickets to the ticket granting service of the Kerberos. I need access to the network server. Sometimes it could even be to the file server. It could even be to the application server. Once again, those ticket has been verified, I have verified your tickets as the ticket granting. Here is the ticket to here's the service ticket to the to use the network service, and that's after which it's when that user can then gain access to the service he or she wants to use. Additional access levels, you will have a single sign-on. This is an authentication service that allows a user to use one login and password, meaning username and password combination, to access a set of services. Shebboleth, this is an open source standard that offers single sign-on capabilities. SAML, which is the security assertion markup language, this is an open standard used by parties that allows the exchange of authentication and authorization information. Federated identity management, this allows semi-independent systems to work together. The goal of federated identity management is to allow users of one system to access resources from another system. Transitive trust, this occurs when the trust relationship is considered two-way. Standalone computer, when a computer is not connected to the network, the login account must be stored on the machine, and that login account is stored in the SAM, which is the Security Account Manager. SAM is the local non-hierarchical database of users and groups on the local Windows system. Hash, this is a computer value that uniquely identifies the data. Secondary logon, these allows a user to be logged in as a standard user but run specific program as an administrator. Password protected screensavers. This is a simple and effective way to limit access to a local computer. Password can also be required when a computer sleeps. User rights. Policy, this is a set of rules that can automatically control access to resources. Excuse me. Local policy, this is a policy management on the local computer. Group policies, these are policies that are managed, that are configured on the server. Locked down, these ensure systems are protected from unwanted access. Hardening, this refers to process of reducing or eliminating vulnerabilities on a system. Attack surface, many areas that could give a hacker access to the system. Password policy. These provide rules that must be followed when a password is created or changed. And here are just some of the policy that I just mentioned that exists on the Windows computer. As you can see, under the password policy, you can see the different policies like enforce password history, maximum password age, minimum password length, and their description. Also here, we have the account lockout policy, and under that, you have the different policies and their description. Account lockout duration, account lockout threshold, reset account lockout counter after. User account control. This is a technology used to govern security by limiting what a standard user is able to do on a system. This helps prevent unknown or potentially dangerous settings being made without the knowledge of the user. On this note, we've come to the end of section 3.1, and we will go through our review questions. Question number 1, what is the vulnerability that allows a person to see what a user is entering, such as a password? And that is shoulder surfing. Question 2, directories should be based on which protocol to allow use with multiple systems. Directories should be based on which protocol to allow use with multiple systems. That's the lightweight directory access protocol. Question 3, a security technique that requires the user not to be using the computer system is known as what strategy? That's the mandatory vacation, mandatory vacation. Question 4. What allows you to log in one time and access multiple services without having to re-enter login credential? That's the single sign-on, single sign-on, single sign-on. Question 5. What system configuration should you set to require administrative credential for installing software? You need to set the user account control. That's the user account control. And on this note, we've come to the end of section 3.1, and we'll look at the next section, which is section 3.2, access to files and folder. In this section, our key terms are explicit permissions, implicit permissions, inherited permissions, new technology file system permissions, and share permissions. Our learning goals are to explain how to set permissions on a shared folder, to differentiate between share and NTFS permission, that is the new technology file system permissions. Share permission. What is a share permission? A share permission allows users to share folders. And when you share the folder, it means that the users can also have access to the files in that folder. But there's also a way whereby even if you share a folder, if there's a particular file, if there is a group of files within that folder, you don't want that user or the user you share that folder with, you don't want them to access it. There's a way you can set that up. Remote connection allows access to files in a shared folder. Again, have no effect on user access when logging in directly at the machine. Share permission is a discretionary access control where a person who owns the file or the folder has the ability to give others permissions to access them. Sharing a folder in Windows. If you want to share a folder in Windows, sharing must be enabled in the control panel. User who owns the folder has full control permission, and there are 3 permissions. You have the read, change, and full control. And here are the 3 share permissions as well as their description. If you have the read permission, you can only read or see the file and read the content, but you cannot change the content. If you have the change permission, this allows user to read the files and make changes to the file, as well as rename the file, delete the file, or create a new one. Full control allows the user to see, read, and change files, and give other users permission. Security considerations of sharing folders. Shared folder presents an access point for hacker or employee. Can be used to exploit other system vulnerabilities or provide access to confidential information or data. Shares can be created and hidden, meaning that a folder or file can be created as a shared and it can be hidden. New technology file system permissions. These allows rights to be set for users on the local machine. Secures local access. This provides more options for permission. Remember, the first shared permissions that we saw only has 3 options, which are read, change, and full control. under the NTFS, it's more than that. You have the full control, you have the modify, you have the read and execute, you have the list folder content, you have the read, write, and you also have the advanced. These are the permissions that are available under the NTFS permission. And on this slide, you can see the descriptions of each. Receiving permissions, explicit permissions, those a user is given at a specific location. That is the explicit permission. Those are the permission a user is given at a specific location. Inherited permission, these are permission a user receives by default at a lower level. Implicit permissions, these are permissions a user receives through another object, such as a group, meaning that if a user is a member of another group or another business unit, he or she can actually receive what is called an implicit permission. Hierarchy of permission order under the NTFS permission. You have the explicit deny, explicit allow, inherited deny, and inherited allow. Here are the scenarios, which I will only be picking on one out of these three scenarios. And I'll be picking on the one with Marisa. Marisa is explicitly allowed read, list, and write permissions for the marketing campaign folder. She has no other explicit or implicit permission. What is the effect of this permission? The effect of this permission is that Marisa can list, read, and write for both the marketing campaign folder and the video subfolder. Remember, from what we can see here, the video folder, the video is a subfolder within the marketing campaign. Now, because Marisa already has that explicit permission, which allows her to read, list, and write to the marketing campaign, automatically that gave her the permission to indirectly rather gave her the permission to the video subfolder. Combining NTFS and shared permission. In many cases, when a folder is shared, permissions are not flexible or granular enough. NTFS permissions are also given to the share. When two permissions combine, more restrictive permission takes precedence. Security consideration of the NTFS permissions. NTFS permissions offer ability to assign very specific permissions to users or groups. A user having a permission for many areas can cause a security risk. Administrators should verify effective permissions. And here is a summary, as earlier, a summary of rights and permissions. The different aspects: consider the definition, the scope, the granularity, the examples, control level, inheritance, scope of action, administered by, persistence, examples in IT security, common implementation, and the impact on security. That's between what is a right and what is a permission. And on this note, we've come to the end of section 2.3. We'll go through the review questions. Question 1, what are the permission options for shared folder? There are just 3. That's read, change, and full control. Question 2, which NTFS permission allows the ability to rename a file? That's the modify. Question 3, How can a shared folder be set to hidden? This is by putting a $sign at the end of the shared name. Question 4. Permissions received from a higher folder are called what type of permissions? They are called inherited permission. Like in the case of Marisa inherited that permission from the marketing campaign folder, which allowed her to access the video subfolder, which is contained in the marketing campaign folder. So that's an example of inherited permission. The net result of all permission assignments results in what a user can do. This is called what type of permission? This is actually called effective permission rather. This is called an effective permission. On this note, we have come to the end of chapter 3, and please be on the lookout for the quiz on this chapter. Do have a great evening and stay safe, and bye for now.